The camera went dark. Inside the control room of a high-security prison in Mexico, alarms started ringing all at once. Officers rushed toward the screens. Camera 12 just cut out. Check the cell. Move, now. Officer Luis Ortega grabbed his radio, his voice shaking just a little. Unit 4, confirm status immediately. No answer. That was the first sign something was very wrong. Because in a place like this, there was always an answer. Luis ran down the hallway with 2 other officers. Their boots echoed against the floor. Fast. Urgent. The kind of sound that meant something had already gone wrong. They reached the cell. Heavy steel door. Locked. Still closed. Luis froze. How? One officer whispered. Luis stepped forward. He opened the door. Inside. The room was empty. The bed was untouched. The walls looked normal. Everything looked exactly how it should be. Except for one thing. The man who was supposed to be there was gone. Luis felt his chest tighten. Because this wasn't just any inmate. This was the cartel boss. The one they said could never escape again. The one who had already escaped once before. Luis stepped deeper into the cell. He looked around carefully. Then he saw it. A small opening near the floor. Almost invisible. Hidden perfectly. He crouched down. Shined his flashlight inside. Dark. Deep. A tunnel. His voice dropped. He's gone. Behind him, another officer spoke. That's not possible. Luis didn't respond. Because it was possible. It had already happened. Once before. And now. It had happened again. The cartel boss had escaped twice. And just as Luis stood up, the lights flickered. Then the power cut out. The entire hallway went black. And from somewhere deep underground, a distant sound echoed. Like something still moving. 1 year earlier, the prison had been placed under strict control. After the first escape, everything changed. More cameras. More guards. More rules. Nothing was left unchecked. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Officer Luis Ortega had been assigned to the high-security unit shortly after the first escape. He took his job seriously. Because he understood the risk. The inmate they were holding wasn't just dangerous. He was powerful. Careful. Patient. His name was Daniel Reyes. Most people didn't say it out loud. They just called him the boss. Luis first saw him during a routine check. Daniel sat on his bed, calm, looking at the wall. No movement. No reaction. Like he was somewhere else in his mind. Luis stopped at the door. You good? He asked. Daniel looked up slowly. His eyes were steady. Yes, he said. That was it. Nothing more. But something about the way he said it didn't feel normal. It felt controlled. Like every word was chosen. Luis moved on. But he remembered that moment. Because Daniel didn't act like other inmates. He didn't complain. He didn't argue. He didn't even seem bored. He just waited. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Everything stayed quiet. Too quiet. Luis noticed small things. Nothing big. Nothing obvious. But enough to stay in his mind. Daniel always knew when guards were coming. Before they reached his cell. Before they made a sound. Luis tested it once. He walked silently down the hall. Slow. Careful. But just before he reached the door, Daniel looked up. Like he had been expecting him. Luis frowned. How did you know I was here? He asked. Daniel gave a small smile. You hear things in here. Luis looked around. There was nothing to hear. Just silence. But still. He wrote it down. Because patterns mattered. Over time, more small things appeared. A camera would glitch for a second. Then return. A door would delay before locking. Then work again. Nothing serious. Nothing worth raising alarm. But all of it. Connected. One afternoon, Luis spoke with another officer, Marco Diaz. You ever feel like something's off with him? Luis asked. Marco shrugged. He's locked in a box. What could he do? Lewis looked back toward the cell. That's what worries me. Marco laughed. You're overthinking it. Maybe he was. But Lewis trusted his instincts. And his instincts said something was building. One night, during a late shift, Lewis heard a faint sound. A low vibration. Like something moving far below the ground. He stopped. Listened. It came again. Soft. Then gone. He walked to Daniel's cell. Daniel was awake. Sitting up. Listening. You hear that? Lewis asked. Daniel looked at him. Then nodded once. Lewis felt a chill. What is it? He asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he said something simple. Time. Lewis frowned. What does that mean? Daniel leaned back against the wall. It means it's almost ready. Lewis stepped closer. Ready for what? But Daniel didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. Like the conversation was over. Lewis stood there for a moment longer. Then walked away. But now, he was sure. Something was happening. And it had been happening for a long time. The next morning, Lewis reported the sound. Maintenance checked everything. Again. Nothing found. No issue, they said. Lewis looked at the report. Then back at the cell. Because he knew what he heard. And Daniel knew it too. Days later, the final signs appeared. A short power flicker. A camera delay. A strange gap in the system log. Small. But real. Lewis brought it up again. This isn't random, he said. But without proof. Nothing changed. Everything stayed the same. Until the night it didn't. The camera went dark. The alarm sounded. The cell was empty. The tunnel was real. And now, standing in the darkness, with the power out and the sound still echoing from below, Luis Ortega realized something important. This wasn't just an escape. It was a plan. A plan that had been built slowly, carefully, right under their feet. And if the sound he heard was still moving, then the escape wasn't over yet. The darkness felt alive. Officer Luis Ortega stood still, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand as the beam cut through the black hallway. The power was still out. Only emergency lights flickered on and off, casting long shadows across the walls. And from below, that sound again. A low, distant rumble. Like something moving deep underground. Lewis spoke into his radio. Back up to Unit 4. We have an active tunnel. Repeat, active tunnel. This time, the response came fast. Units moving in. Hold position. Lewis didn't move. Because now he understood something important. If Daniel Reyes had escaped through that tunnel, then he wasn't far yet. Not yet. Lewis turned back to the cell. The opening near the floor looked darker than before. Deeper. Like it was leading somewhere far beyond the prison walls. One officer stepped closer. You think he's still down there? He asked. Lewis nodded slowly. He has to be. Then he made a decision. I'm going in. The other officer looked shocked. That's not protocol. Lewis tightened his grip on the flashlight. Neither is this. Without waiting, he crouched down and stepped into the tunnel. The air inside was cold, damp, tight. The walls were rough dirt, packed and shaped carefully. Not rushed. Not messy. This had taken time. A lot of time. Lewis moved forward slowly, the light shaking across the tunnel walls. Every step echoed. Every breath sounded louder. Behind him, another officer followed. You sure about this? He whispered. Lewis didn't answer. Because his focus was ahead. After a few steps, the tunnel widened slightly. Just enough to move faster. And then, he saw something. Tracks. Fresh. Clear marks in the dirt. Someone had passed through here not long ago. Lewis knelt down. Touched the ground. Still loose. Still moving. He's ahead, Lewis said quietly. They kept going. The tunnel twisted slightly, turning away from the prison building. That meant one thing. This wasn't just a hiding place. This was an exit. Suddenly, Lewis stopped. He raised his hand. Wait. The other officer froze. Why? Lewis pointed his light forward. There. In the distance. A faint glow. Very small. But real. Light. Coming from somewhere ahead. Lewis's heart began to race. Because that meant Daniel wasn't in total darkness. That meant someone was waiting. They moved slower now. Careful. Silent. Step by step. The tunnel grew wider. Stronger. Reinforced in some areas. This wasn't just one man digging. This was planned. Built. Organized. Lewis reached a bend in the tunnel. He turned the corner slowly. And froze. Because just ahead, the tunnel opened into a larger space. A chamber. Inside it. Tools. Lights. Equipment. And something else. Fresh footprints. And then, a sound. A small movement. Lewis snapped his flashlight toward it. Stop. The beam landed on a figure at the far end of the chamber. For a second, everything froze. Then the figure turned. It wasn't Daniel. It was someone else. Another man. Wearing work clothes. Not prison clothes. Lewis's eyes widened. How did you get in here? He demanded. The man didn't answer. He just looked at them. Calm. Like he had expected this moment. Then, he ran. Go! Lewis shouted. They chased him. Through the chamber. Into another tunnel. This one was wider. Cleaner. Faster to move through. The man ahead didn't hesitate. He knew the path. Turn after turn. Left. Right. Down. Up slightly. Lewis followed as fast as he could. Stop, he shouted again. But the man kept going. Then suddenly, he disappeared around another corner. Lewis pushed harder. Reached the corner. Turned. And stopped. Because the tunnel split. Two directions. No sound. No movement. Nothing. Lewis stood there, breathing hard. Which way? The other officer asked. Lewis looked left. Then right. Both tunnels looked the same. Both dark. Both silent. He clenched his jaw. Because now, they had lost him. And if they lost him, they lost the path. Lewis spoke into his radio again. We need full underground mapping. Now. Static answered him. Then a voice. Power is still unstable. Systems are down. Lewis closed his eyes for a second. Because that meant no cameras. No tracking. No map. They were blind. Underground. In a place that wasn't supposed to exist. He opened his eyes. And made another decision. We split up. The other officer hesitated. That's risky. Lewis nodded. So is letting him go. They didn't have time. Lewis took the left path. The other officer took the right. The tunnel grew tighter again. Darker. The air heavier. Lewis moved carefully. Listening. Watching. Then, he heard it. Footsteps. Ahead. Very faint. But real. Lewis moved faster. The sound got louder. Closer. Then, light appeared again. Brighter this time. Lewis pushed forward. And suddenly, the tunnel opened. Into open air. He stepped out. Blinking. Because after the darkness, the light felt too strong. He looked around. And realized where he was. Outside the prison. Farther than he expected. Hidden by trees and land. And there. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Lewis's heart dropped. Because that meant one thing. Daniel Reyes was not alone. He had help. Help from outside. Help that had been planned from the start. Lewis stepped forward slowly. Looking at the tracks. Still fresh. Still clear. Then, he heard something behind him. He turned quickly. Back toward the tunnel. Because from deep inside, another sound echoed. Footsteps. But this time, more than one.